Hello and welcome to Train Signal. You're watching video number 3, Creating and Using Virtual Machines. This is part of Fast Track CBT Video Lab, Microsoft Virtualization, Virtual PC, and Server. In this video, we'll be learning how to create new virtual machines with Microsoft Virtual Server. We'll learn how to use media, either physical or virtual media, which would be ISO image files. We'll talk about installing our operating system, and we'll actually install Windows 2003 Server under Microsoft Virtual Server. We'll look at configuring BIOS settings. We'll learn how to install the virtual machine additions, and we'll configure and add new hardware to our virtual machine. Finally, we'll learn about removing, adding, and cloning a virtual machine. So with that, let's take a look at our scenario. In this scenario with the Blue Crab Food Company, we've just installed Microsoft Virtual Server. Now we'll add our first virtual server. This will be a Windows 2003 server that will later be used for network infrastructure services. In doing this, you'll learn how to install a virtual machine operating system, virtual machine additions, and learn more about configuring Microsoft virtual machines. So now let's learn how to create our virtual machine. Creating virtual machines in Microsoft Virtual Server is easy. To do this, you go to the web-based administrative interface and you go to Virtual Machines, then Create. You provide a name, the amount of RAM, the hard drive size that you want on the virtual machine, and the type of hard drive. Could be an IDE hard drive or a SCSI hard drive. We'll learn more about the differences between those two types of hard drives in video number 4. Then you tell it the type of network connection or where you want the virtual network adapter to be connected to the physical machine's network adapters. So with that, let's give it a try. We'll go down to Start, Programs, go to Microsoft Virtual Server, and go to the Virtual Server Administrative Interface. It's going to prompt me here for my local administrator account, or administrator equivalent in my case. I'm going to maximize the window. And if you look here at the master status, you see here I have one client called Client 1. This is one virtual server. It's a Windows 2003 server that I created and just added for demonstration purposes. So what we need to do is to create a new virtual machine. So if I go over here to Virtual Machines and click on Create, this is what we're going to do to add our new virtual machine. Now don't get confused here with Add. Add is if you already have a virtual machine on your hard drive and you just want to bring it into Microsoft Virtual Server. Create means you don't have a virtual hard drive yet. You don't have a virtual machine at all. And you need to both create it here on Microsoft Virtual Server and actually install the operating system, create the virtual hard drive, and everything. The whole process is done here under Create. So that's what we're going to do. I'm going to click on Create. And the first thing that you do is you give it a virtual machine name. So I'm going to call this Blue Crab Food Win Server 1. Then it prompts me for the amount of RAM that I want to add to this virtual machine. The minimum is 128 megabytes. I really want this machine to perform well. I'm going to give it 384 megabytes of RAM. Okay, here it says virtual hard drive. We can create a new virtual hard drive right here. We can use an existing virtual hard drive that we might already have, or we can attach a virtual hard disk later. In our case, we want to add a new virtual hard drive. It defaults to 127 gigabytes, and it's an IDE disk drive. It says the maximum size allowed is 127 gigabytes for IDE and 2040 gigabytes for SCSI disk. So you can go up to 2 terabytes with SCSI disk. I don't have that much, obviously, on my personal computer here that I'm using to demonstrate this. And even 127 gigabytes is way more than we'll really need. For Windows 2003 Server, I'm going to say 6 gigabytes. That's really all it needs, and we're just going to leave it as an IDE disk for now. So let's go on down. The next thing we need to specify is the virtual network adapter. So when you bring this computer up, what network is it going to be connected to? By default, it's not connected to any network, so it wouldn't have any network access. Well, I need this computer attached to my local network, the same network that my host computer is attached to. So if I do the drop-down box on this, you can see here I have a number of different networks. The first one is external network, and it gives the name of the network adapter, Gigabit Ethernet network. This is actually my physical Ethernet adapter on the back of my computer. Well, I don't want to connect it to this network because I know that that network adapter is not connected to anything. I don't have a cable plugged into that. So you need to know your different networks, what networks are available on your host computer to know what network is going to be connected to your guest computer. So if I go over here to Start and I go to Settings, go to Network Connections, if I just click on this, it brings up my different network connections. Here's my local area connection. If I scroll over here, here's the device name. So this is really what it's using is the device name. So notice here it says that this is disabled, and I know I don't have a network cable plugged into that local area connection. So I don't want to use that. But then if we scroll down here, what's connected? Well, we have the wireless network connection. That's connected. So if I scroll over here, you can see it's connected, and it's a Broadcom adapter. If you would ignore some of these other network adapters that I have on my computer, in your case, you probably only have a local network connection, and that's what you want to connect it to. But my point here is just to show you the different types of network adapters you might have, and when you go over here to add your virtual machine, you need to know what type of network you want to connect your virtual machine to on the host. And in a future video, we'll be spending a lot more time on virtual networks. So for now, I'm going to click wireless because I know that wireless is the network that I have really connected to my local area network, not this network up here. The internal network, this would just be an internal network that wouldn't attach at all to a physical network. So this is like an internal virtual machine network. So the purpose of that is, say for example, I had 2 virtual machines and I just wanted to network those 2 virtual machines only together. If I chose internal network on both of those, they could both talk to each other, but no one else. So in my case, I'm using wireless. It's connected. It has an internet connection. I'm going to choose that. The next thing here it says is the virtual machine additions. It says we highly recommend you install the virtual machine additions. These provide performance and feature enhancements for Windows-based guest operating systems. Features include time synchronization, mouse integration, and a heartbeat for the guest operating system to monitor the state of the virtual machine. We will be installing virtual machine additions in just a little bit. So just to summarize, the the important things here when it comes to creating a virtual machine. First off, give it a name. Second, give it the amount of RAM that you're going to allocate to that virtual machine. Third, tell it what size hard drive you'll be using. And fourth, assign it a network adapter. So 4 things that you need to do to create a virtual machine. And there's one more thing I want to point out about the RAM right here. Now, when you allocate this RAM, make sure that the amount of RAM you're allocating, it doesn't take over the amount of RAM you have on your system. Let me say that in other words. Say that you have 1 gigabyte of RAM. Well, you don't want to allocate 512 megabytes or 768 megabytes of RAM for your virtual machine because that RAM will permanently be allocated as long as that virtual machine is running. That RAM will be permanently allocated out of your host operating system's RAM. So in my case, I have 2 gigabytes of RAM, so 384 megabytes really isn't that big of a piece of my host operating system's RAM. You want to make sure that you have enough RAM allocated to your host operating system so that the host operating system can still function and do its job, and it still performs, reasonably. Now, on some servers, you don't use a lot of the host operating system, but you still need some RAM allocated for the host operating system. On a desktop or a laptop, like the one that I'm working on here, I want to make sure I have plenty allocated to the host operating system because I still intend to do most of my day-to-day activities on the host operating system and use the virtual machines just for testing, different applications. So the amount of RAM you allocate to the host operating system may depend a little bit on how much you intend on using the host operating system, but still make sure you have at least, I would say, 512 megabytes or more left over for the host operating system, because that's really what your host operating system needs, to begin with. So say you have two virtual machines running, and they're both 384, that's 768 right there. But if you only have 1 gigabyte on your system, you don't have much left for the host operating system. You just have 256 megabytes. So make sure that you do the math, and keep in mind this RAM is only used when those virtual servers are running. So you could have 10 virtual servers on your computer, but if you only ran one at a time, you're only using the RAM that that one server has allocated for it. So I'm going to leave this to 384, and let's go down to the bottom here, and we'll click Create, and we'll create our first Microsoft Virtual Server virtual machine. All right, we were successful. We created Blue Crab Food, Win Server 1. And let's look at the status here. This is the master status. So this machine is off. You can see right here. You can see it doesn't have any sort of statistics because it's never been run. Here you can see the VMC file. This is the virtual machine configuration file. That's where it's located right there. By default, it goes into the All Users directory, Documents, Shared Virtual Machines, the name of the server, and then the name of the VMC file. If we scroll down, you can see the general name for the server. You can see the RAM that we allocated. You can see that it has one hard drive and that the maximum size is 6 gigabytes. Currently, it's expanded to only 14.5K. So it's a tiny little hard drive right now. Can't hardly hold anything. That was the automatic screen refresh here on Virtual Server, just updating the status. You can see we have one virtual CD. It's the host drive D. It's mapped to the host drive on the host computer. We have one virtual network adapter connected to my wireless network. And we have, some other things here. 2 COM ports, 1 LPT, and so on. So our virtual hard drive right now, we said is only 14.5 kilobytes, but it's a dynamically expanding hard drive, so it can grow up to 6 gigabytes. And it will certainly grow as we add or as we install the operating system. All right, so let's go back to our slides. All right, so we created our new virtual machine. We provided the name, the amount of RAM, the hard drive size and type, and the network connection. Now let's go on and talk about physical media. Now with Microsoft Virtual Server, you can either use physical media or you can use virtual media, which I'm going to call ISO files or image files. So physical media just means you have a physical CD stuck in your computer. It's a real CD-ROM or a DVD. Virtual media means it's a software file. It's a file on your hard drive that your computer or your virtual server thinks is a CD-ROM drive or a DVD drive. So you can access media on the guest operating system either by mounting a physical CD or DVD disk or by mounting virtual disks, which are called ISO files. Now, to use physical media from the host operating system, what you do is you edit your virtual machine's CD, DVD drive properties, and you select the host CD or DVD drive that you want to mount on the guest operating system. And I'm going to show you how to do this. Now, to use virtual media from the host, you edit your virtual machine CD, DVD drive properties, then you select the ISO file from the host that you want to mount on the guest operating system as a removable drive. Now, the benefit to using ISO files is that they're much faster than using CD, DVD drives, and they're also more convenient. Let me tell you how they're more convenient. In my case, I've got an external USB drive, and on there I've created ISO files of many of my common CDs that I insert into my drive. So, for example, I've got Windows XP, I've got Windows 2003 Server, I've got Windows 2000, I've got Microsoft Office. All these common CDs that I might generally have to stick in my CD drive, I've created a virtual image of that CD and I have it on this USB drive. Let me show you. If I go to my computer, here I've got, let's see, which drive is it? It's the data drive here. Okay, you see here, here's Windows 2003 Server with Service Pack 1 included. This is an image file. See, that's the ISO file, the image file, and it's 579 megabytes. Here I've got Windows XP Pro with Service Pack 2, the 120-day eval version. It's 593 megabytes. Here's Windows XP Pro Open License. Here's Windows XP Pro Service Pack 2. Here's Windows Office 2003 Pro. So I've got these different image files here. Then I've got the keys that go along with them. And I have the physical media for all these, and I own these products. So don't think that I just copied them from someone else. These are actually my CDs, but what I've done is I've created the image files for each one of them. So the reason for doing this is, one, the CD is never going to get scratched, right? You're not going to mess up that CD. Two is I don't have to go look for the CD, to find it to insert it in the drive. Plus, when you insert a CD in a drive, you know how long it takes for it to read the CD and find out what's on it, and it takes a lot longer. Um, Three is I can use these much easier by mounting them inside virtual machines. So I can install operating systems using these virtual images. I can also mount them on my local machine here. So I've got a program called Daemon Tools. You can download it from the internet. It's free, and it's a little program that runs and allows you to mount ISO images on your host operating system, just like they were drive letters. Now, that doesn't have anything to do with virtual machine. Let me show you both how to mount a physical CD, DVD media off of your host operating system, and also how to mount a virtual image off of your host operating system. So let's go over to the Blue Crab Food server here. I'm going to scroll down, and right here you see CD DVD. I'm going to click on that. Okay, and by default, we have a physical CD DVD drive connected to our host, to our guest virtual machine, and that maps to the DVD drive that's on my computer. So it maps to D that's on my physical computer. I could change it here to map to some other drive on my physical computer. In fact, I have a DVD burner attached to my computer via USB, so that's one of these other drives here. I could attach it to that. But also, I could go here and I could do a known image file. So a known image file is an ISO file. If I do a drop down here, it shows me some of the known image files that it's aware of. But to connect other image files, I have to give it the fully qualified path to the file. So to do this, I'm going to minimize everything. I'm going to go back here to my data drive. So my path is going to be G:// and then right here, the name of my image file. So I'm going to do a Control-C on that. I'm going to copy that. And I know that it's an image file, so it ends in .iso. So I'm going to go back here, and I'm going to say G:// I'm going to do Control-V to paste that in and do .iso. So I'm connecting a fully qualified path to my CD drive on the guest virtual machine. So this is on my host operating system. I'm connecting it to my guest operating system. and it's a virtual drive, but to the guest operating system, it will appear to be a real CD drive with with this disk inserted. Now let's go back here and double check. Yes, this is misspelled. Let me correct that. There we go, Windows, and I'm going to go back here and correct it right here. All right, Windows 2003 Server. And this is the operating system CD that we're going to use to install our new virtual machine. So I'm going to click OK. And let's scroll down here. And it says that we have a CD DVD drive. It's a virtual CD drive, and it's connected to this ISO image file right here. So that's great. We've got our media inserted in our virtual machine. It's virtual media for our virtual machine. And when we boot up, we're going to boot off of this CD so we can install our Windows 2003 Server operating system. All right, so let's go back to our slides. So we talked about media. We talked about physical CD media versus virtual media, which would be the ISO image files. Now let's go on and talk about installing our operating system. Now once our virtual machine is created, you'll need to install an operating system. Otherwise, all you can do is go into the BIOS. The BIOS is the basic firmware, you could say, for the computer, and we'll talk about BIOS in just a second. But pretty much it's worthless to do any computing task. You need an operating system. Now you can install your OS either from physical or virtual ISO media, which we just talked about. Many times people will clone an already installed operating system instead of reinstalling it. So if I already had a working virtual machine, I could copy that virtual machine and create a second one. And I'll talk about cloning towards the end of this video. Now for more advanced users, you can use Pixie booting, which is the pre-built execution environment, to install your OS over the network. This uses the Windows Remote Installation Service, RIS. But that is for advanced users. That's something you have to set up. That's something that you would use if you're installing operating systems all the time on multiple PCs or servers. So I don't have a Pixie booting environment here. We're going to install it the old-fashioned way. We're going to insert a disk, either physical or virtual, and boot up our operating system and install it. Now before we do that, let's take a look at our BIOS settings on the Windows 2003 guest operating system. So if I go over here to start this virtual machine so we can go in and look at the BIOS, I'm going to go here to this little box that says the name of the server, and my only choices right now are turn on or remove. So I'm going to turn it on. Says it's turning on, it updates. I'm going to click here to do the screen thumbnail so I can see it. I have to log in. And it's already booting the Windows setup. So we missed the BIOS, which is right before the Windows setup. So let's go back here. Actually, let's go back here to the master status. And let's turn this off. Now let's go down and let's start our virtual machine remote console. And here I need the name of this server. Okay. You didn't see it right there, but very quickly it said press delete to enter the BIOS. So I pressed delete because I knew if I didn't, it would quickly go into that Windows 2003 installation screen. So now we're in the BIOS of our virtual machine. So this is like regular old BIOS on any computer or server. This is AMI BIOS. You can see here. Here's the version number. Build date was 2/22/06. It knows that this computer has 384 megabytes of virtual RAM. It has a system time and date. If I scroll over here to the right, I can go into advanced configuration. I can go into the IDE configuration. You can see the primary IDE channel is hard drive, secondary is CD-ROM. I can of course go in here and change some of this stuff. If I press escape, I go back one. I can go here into the floppy configuration. Thinks I have a floppy drive. I'll press escape. I can go into the boot settings. There's quiet boot. There's boot up with numlock. There's power management. There's the boot order. So here, first it looks for the floppy drive, then the CD, then the hard drive. So you might want to change this for some reason. You may want it to look for, just take off the floppy and just look for CD-ROM or hard drive, or just hard drive first if you always boot from the hard drive. There's the hard disk drives here. Virtual hard drive is our only hard drive. Floppy drives, CD-ROM drives, we have virtual CD drive. There's security, just like any other BIOS. You can set a password on the BIOS. And that's it. This is what the BIOS is. So right now there's no operating system installed on this computer. There's only the BIOS. And you might find some reason to go in here and change the BIOS settings, but most of the time you're not going to. But it's important to know that it's there. And I pressed delete on the keyboard, the delete button, to enter the BIOS just before the system booted. So you have to be fast to catch that. So I'm going to press escape to exit. It says, do you want to discard changes? I'll say OK. And then it goes right into Windows Setup. So right now it's booting the virtual CD that we have inserted in the drive. So I'll let it continue to do that. And let's go back to our slides for a second and talk a little bit more about BIOS settings. All right, on the BIOS settings, we talked about most of this already, but let me just hit the high points. The BIOS is on every computer, and it's used to manage and control the computer's hardware. It's built into the computer's motherboard, and there's no operating system necessary to use it. Even virtual machines have BIOS. Now, to access the BIOS on your guest, you press the delete key on the keyboard when the computer is first powered on. I recommend leaving the BIOS settings at the default unless you have some reason to change them. So we already looked at the BIOS, and I wanted to point out back in video 1, I said that the virtual server actually emulates certain hardware. And this is from a Microsoft link on the Microsoft website. The BIOS actually emulates AMI BIOS with the Intel 440BX chipset. It knows that it has these onboard components. It has a floppy drive, a single floppy drive, just one, up to 2 COM ports, a single parallel printer port that maps to the computer's parallel port, emulates a Microsoft IntelliMouse, a PS2 101 Microsoft keyboard. It has a multifunction network adapter, which is this model here. The virtual machines use the CPU of the physical computer, which means that each virtual machine has the same type of CPU as the physical computer. Guest operating systems only see a single CPU. The BIOS supports up to 3.6 gigabytes of RAM per virtual machine. Most people don't have that much, but you can do that. And I say most people don't have that much. I'm talking about people who are usually testing Microsoft Virtual Server, on their desktop or laptop. Now, plenty of servers and plenty of people who use Virtual Server in production might have that amount of RAM or much more, so that they can allocate a couple gigabytes to each virtual machine. But of course, the need to do that all depends on what those virtual machines are doing. The BIOS emulates a S3 Trio 64 graphics adapter with 4 megabytes of video RAM. It emulates up to 4 IDE drives, hard drives, or CD-ROM/DVD drives, or ISO images. The virtual hard disk can hold up to 127 gigabytes per IDE channel. Now for SCSI, there's emulation for an Adaptec 7870 SCSI adapter. Each SCSI adapter supports up to 7 virtual hard disks of up to 2 terabytes each. Now, there is no sound on Microsoft Virtual Server. Microsoft Virtual PC does offer sound, but Virtual Server does not. So that's enough about BIOS. And our next piece of this is to complete the installation of Microsoft Windows Server 2003. Now, this installation is just like any other regular installation of Microsoft Windows 2003. So if I go back here to my server console for the virtual machine, you can see it says, "Welcome to Setup." And this is just a standard setup for Microsoft Windows Server 2003. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and just answer all the questions and let it go through with copying the files and actually installing Windows Server 2003. So in that time, just so you don't have to sit here and watch the installation, I'm going to pause the video, let the installation complete, and then at that point I'll come back to the video and you can see the results of our installation on our new Blue Crab Food Windows Server 2003. So I'm going to pause the video and I'll be right back. Okay, we're back and our Windows 2003 server installation has completed. If we go over here to the VMRC console, you can see that. During the installation, I just answered all the typical Windows installation questions, about the time, basic network settings, the name, license key, things like that. And the installation, of course, went fine. It's just a regular installation of Windows. And what I want to show you now is just basically life without the virtual server editions or the virtual machine editions. We're going to talk about the virtual server editions in just a second, but what I want to show you is what it's like without them. So if you'll notice here, I've got this VMRC console, and I can move my mouse around the outside of it here, and it works as normal. But when I move my mouse over the console, you can see my mouse here turns into a little dot. So I've got this little dot, and I'm not controlling the mouse pointer that's actually up here anymore. And that's because I don't have these virtual server editions installed. So what I have to do to actually take control of this mouse pointer here is I have to click on the screen. And when I click on the screen, I can take control of that mouse pointer. Now I can control the mouse pointer, but if I try to go outside of the screen, I can't. I'm stuck. I'm stuck in that window. I can't get out. So this is because I don't have the virtual server editions. I'm stuck in the window. So to get out of the window, I have to press something called the host key. The host key is a programmable key. Actually, you can program the host key to be whatever you want. But the important thing is that by default, the host key is the right Alt key. So if you look at your space bar, just to the right of that, there's the Alt button. That's the right Alt key on the right side of the keyboard. When you press that, I couldn't get out before, I press it, and now my mouse is free. And I can get out, I can go do other things, but when I come back here, I can't control the mouse again. I have to click on the screen so that I can control the mouse, then I'm stuck inside the screen. So that's basically the sad, sad life without the VMware, or I'm sorry, the virtual server editions, the virtual machine editions. Without these editions installed in your guest operating system, the biggest headache really is this loss of mouse synchronization between the host and the guest. And that's the biggest thing, the most beneficial thing that the virtual server editions provide you, is that mouse synchronization. But there are a number of other things that the virtual server editions do provide you. So before we log in, let's go back to our slides and let's learn more about these important virtual server editions. So to get out, I'm going to press the right Alt key. I'm going to minimize this. And now we're back at our slides. And now let's talk about installing the virtual machine editions. Just to review what we talked about, with the host key, we learned that the virtual server editions or the virtual machine editions use this host key. It's a very important key. By default, the host key is the right alt key. Now, this key is used in combination with other keys to use special key combinations on the guest operating system that would normally affect the host operating system. For example, say you press Control Alt Delete on your computer. You're running virtual server, you press Control Alt Delete. Well, what would happen is, of course, it's going to affect your host computer. So your host computer is going to come up to the Windows security screen and ask you if you want to log off or run Task Manager or whatever. But really, what you wanted to do is press Control Alt Delete to log into the guest operating system. What do you do about that? How do you log into the guest operating system if every time you press Control Alt Delete, it affects the host operating system? Well, the answer to this is to use the host key. When you press Right Alt and then the Delete button, that's the equivalent of pressing Control Alt Delete in the guest operating system. So to log into any guest operating system, you press Right Alt and Delete, and that happens no matter whether or not you have the virtual server editions installed or not. You still need to know about this host key. It's still important. The virtual server editions only provide you, things like mouse synchronization and a couple of other benefits we're going to talk about in a second. Um, those virtual server editions only provide that. They don't get around, all possible need for the host key. So my point is the host key and the related keyboard combinations are important whether or not you have the virtual server editions installed inside your guest operating system or not. So some of the benefits of the virtual machine editions are right here. They synchronize the mouse control. That's great. That's the biggest thing that you immediately need. They provide better guest performance, and that's due to drivers. They install special drivers in the guest operating system, and you'll get better performance out of that. They do time synchronization between the host and the guest operating system. They install specialized registry keys for performance monitoring and inventory in the guest operating system. So these are special keys so that software can talk to that guest operating system and know that it's a virtual machine, and know a lot of different things about the status of that virtual machine. So this is used for performance monitoring and inventory. Then there's the virtual machine heartbeat for scripting and monitoring. So this VM heartbeat is used for scripting so that, say I run a script on the host operating system that monitors each of my virtual machines to tell me if they're running. And if they're not running, maybe it restarts them automatically. Just an example of a script that you could write because you have that heartbeat and you know whether the virtual machine is really running or not. Now, to install the VM editions, you must be the administrator on the guest operating system. VM editions can be installed from the web-based administrative interface or manually. The VM editions are actually an ISO file that's on the host operating system. Let me show you where that file is. If I go to my computer, go to my C drive, go to my program files, and down to Microsoft Virtual Server right here. And then right here are the virtual machine editions. If I go in here, see these image files. Here's the two image files right here, pre-compact and the VM editions. The VM editions, this is actually what you need right here. So there's some other helper files here, but the main thing that's most important is the VM editions. These are right here. So you can manually install these somehow on the guest operating system, but the web-based interface really helps automate this, make this a lot easier than trying to share this on the network and then access it on the guest or something like that. But this is what you're installing. It's a program that's installed in the guest operating system. So let me close that out. Let's go back to our slides. And we'll be installing the VM editions here in just a second. Now, as I said before, until the VM editions are installed, your mouse will be locked into controlling either your host or your guest operating system. When you're controlling your guest operating system and you want to go back to the host, you must press the right control and right alt to release the control. So let's try that one more time. If I go here to my remote control screen, you notice the little dot that my mouse turns into. If I click on the screen, I then have control of the mouse, but I can't get out of this box. I'm stuck in this box. So if I hold down the right control and the alt key, my mouse is released and I can go back to the host operating system. So that's how this works. Now let me point out some features here of the virtual server remote control client. So if I click on this, there's some menu options here that are important. The first one is special keys. So if I go over here, I can actually send a Control-Alt-Delete right here from this menu. So instead of pressing the host key, which by default is the right alt, and then the delete key, I can do from the keyboard, I can actually click here and it sends a Control-Alt-Delete to that guest operating system. So let's go back and look at the other special keys. I can send a print screen because normally if you press print screen, it's going to happen in the host operating system, not in the guest operating system. I can send an alt print screen. As you know, alt print screen captures just one window to a clipboard, not the entire screen like print screen does. So those are some of the special keys that I can do from this menu option. Here's other options for the client, not for special keys. I can connect to the server. I can switch to administrator display. Let's check that out. This is the administrator display right here. So it shows me my two different virtual machines that I have configured on this computer, and I can click on those to access those. So if I go back to the administrator display, I can click on this other machine and I can access it. Even though it's not running, it will actually start up that virtual machine. Now, I really don't want two virtual machines running at the same time, so I'm going to go back here to the client status web page. I'm going to refresh that right here, refresh my screen. Shows me that this server is running, and I'm just going to turn it off. It told me that unsaved data would be lost, but I know that there's no unsaved data. I just turned that computer on. So we have the Blue Crab food Windows server that we installed, and then this other demo machine that I already had. So let me minimize that. So this is the administrative display of the virtual machine remote control application. So if I click here, I can switch to full screen, which you can actually do by pressing host then enter. Host again is the right alt key. So let's go ahead and well, first let's click on this running machine. Now let's go to full screen. So that's the full screen view. And then to get out of this, I press the host key, then enter. And then I'm back to my regular view. So let's go back to remote control. Here's the connection properties, which is host I. Host I, this shows me the properties of the virtual machine remote control client. Says that this is a 640 by 480 display. That's this window here connected to a virtual server on the local host, port 5900. View only. View only would allow me to not make any control or not have any control of the virtual machine. So right now I'm just watching. I've tried to take control of this virtual machine, but by clicking my mouse on it, nothing happens. I can't even move the mouse inside that virtual machine. So someone else would have to be controlling it, or you know, for anything to happen. I can't do anything on it. And this is, I think, a safe way. If you just wanted to monitor a server and have it up in a window, you could sit there and you could do view only. And that way you can't accidentally, you know, click on something on the server or do anything to the server. So I'm going to press the right control key, then the right alt, release my mouse, go back here to remote control, and notice how view only is checked. I'm going to click on it again, and now view only has been removed. And again, I can do all these things with the keyboard. I can press the right Alt key and V for view only. Here I can set the host key. So I can set the host key to whatever I want. The default, of course, is the right Alt, but it can be whatever I want it to be. Here I can toggle through my different virtual machines. So say I've got 4 different virtual machines running on this host. I can press the right Alt key and the right arrow, and I can scroll through those different virtual machines. And then here's just information about the virtual machine remote client. So there's some pretty powerful features here that you can use inside the virtual machine remote control client. And again, to me, the most important ones are understanding what the host key is and understanding how to press Control Alt Delete on the remote computer so that you can log in, and then how to get your mouse released from the guest computer in the event that you don't have the VM additions installed. So again, if I click on here, I'm taking control of the guest computer. I can't get my mouse released. I hold down right control, I press right Alt, and my mouse is released and I can go back over here to my slides. So now let's go ahead and let's install the VM additions. To do this, I'm going to go over here to the web-based interface. I'm going to go into the configuration mode of this server we've been working with. Notice here all my stats are updated and I've got a performance graph, a CPU usage graph. If I click on that, it shows me my CPU resource allocation and it shows me the graph there. Let me go back. So I've got a lot of stats here I didn't have before. I've got network I/O, I've got disk I/O, I've got average CPU utilization, I've got the uptime for this virtual machine. My stats have been updated. But again, we're here to look at the VM additions. So I'm going to click on this, and it tells me that the VM additions are not installed, or else this screen here would look different. So to install the VM additions, I check this checkbox. Now it says, in order to capture the VM additions.iso image, the virtual machine must be running. If the guest operating system is configured to autoplay CD-ROMs, virtual machine addition setup will start automatically. Otherwise, you'll need to manually install the VM additions once the image is captured. Click here for more information. So basically what this is going to do is this is going to mount the VM ISO image as a virtual CD-ROM on the guest operating system. And if autoplay is enabled, that just means you stick in a CD, and if there's an auto run file on the CD, it'll automatically start in that computer. So assuming that's enabled, the VM additions will automatically start on this guest operating system. So before I do this, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to go over here and log in. I'm going to click on the screen so I have control of the mouse. I'm going to press the right Alt key and delete. That way I get my logon screen. So let me log on. And I'm logging onto this computer for the first time. Still, the amazing thing to me about Microsoft Virtual Server is that I'm able to run this fully functional Windows 2003 server inside my Windows XP Pro operating system. So to me, that's really powerful considering all the different things I'd like to be able to test. I'd like to be able to test Windows Active Directory. I'd like to be able to test, different server applications, adding users to the domain. There's just an unlimited number of things you could test on your laptop by having this Windows 2003 server running in a virtual machine. Okay, so we logged on. Let's close this out. We're not going to run any of these security settings at this time. So I'm going to close that out. Manage your server comes up. I'm going to close that out. I'm going to, there's the time and date. I'm just going to turn off the clock on the taskbar. And here we go. So we have our desktop. We're logged in. So now let's go back to our virtual machine web administrative interface. Again, I can't get out of the console here. I have to press right control, right alt. I get out. I'm back here on the web interface. I have install virtual machine additions checked. I'm going to click OK. That brings me back here. Let's go over here to our Blue Crab Food server. And if you notice, it says the Windows installer is running and it's preparing to install something. So what happened here is it mounted the ISO file off of my host operating system as a CD drive. An auto run was enabled, so it automatically ran the file that was on that ISO image. And it says, welcome to the setup of the virtual machine additions. This will install the VM additions on your computer. Click Next. I'm going to click in here to take control of this mouse, then click Next. It says this may take several minutes. And we'll be patient because I want you to see the whole thing. So it copies files. It has to install these drivers to enhance the performance. It's going to synchronize the mouse for us. It's going to synchronize the time, provide a number of other features, and the installation is completed. So it really didn't take several minutes at all. I'm going to click Finish. Now it says we must restart for the configuration changes to take effect. So I'm going to click Yes. We want to go ahead and restart the computer. So just like any Windows Server startup, this could take a few seconds. And one thing I've noticed running this Windows Server on my desktop computer here is that it runs very well. The performance is very good. I have a 3 gigahertz single processor on the host computer and 2 gigabytes of RAM. But again, I've only allocated 384 megabytes of that RAM to this guest operating system. So really, I'm sure I could run quite a few more, or at least a couple more virtual servers without affecting my host operating system. So the system has rebooted. I'm going to press the right Alt key, then delete, so that I can log on. And the thing that I immediately notice as I move my mouse outside of this box is that my mouse doesn't get stuck. So the mouse is now synchronized. Hopefully you can see me moving my mouse on the right side of this screen. I can go in and out of the screen. So that's, to me, the most important thing that the VM additions do is the ability to move that mouse out. Just minimize this, go back here, do something, click back on the remote console, and then do something here. So it makes it very fast, and it allows me great mobility and speed in using this virtual machine just like it's any other window on my computer. So it's very powerful. But again, there's a lot of other features that are enabled by the VMware or the VM additions, not just the mouse synchronization. All right, so I'm going to minimize this, and let's go back to our slides. So we successfully installed the VM additions, and now I want to talk about something optional, which is enabling remote management. Now, many people use Microsoft Terminal Services or the RDP protocol to remotely manage their virtual servers. The remote control client that we have here is great, and it's really the only client that's going to give you access to the console no matter what state that virtual server is in. So if this virtual server blue screened and crashed or would not boot, the virtual machine remote control client is the only thing that's going to give me access to that. But the virtual machine remote control client isn't the best client when it comes to speed and performance just for remote management. So to me, the best thing, and certainly the most popular client used for remote management of virtual servers, is the terminal services client. So for us to enable that on this Windows server over here, it only takes a few seconds, and then we can do remote control through terminal services. So let's give that a try. So to do this, I'm going to go over to our Windows 2003 server, and doing this is no different than any other Windows 2003 server. And of course, you can do this on Windows XP as well. So really, no matter what guest operating system you have, as long as it's Windows, it's basically the same type of thing here, enabling terminal services. So to do this, I'm going to go to my computer right here. I'm going to right-click, go to Properties. I'm going to go to Remote, and right here it says Remote Desktop. Enable Remote Desktop on this computer. I'm going to check the checkbox, and it says some local accounts might not have passwords. Accounts used for remote connections must have passwords. Make sure, if you're using a personal firewall, the correct port must be open. I'm going to say OK. And here's the full computer name, bcrab-win 2003-1. And to select the remote users, I'm going to click here. It says the users below can connect to this computer, and any member of the administrators group can connect even if they're not listed. So basically, administrator can connect, and that's really the only account I have on this computer at this point. So I'm just going to say OK. I'm going to say OK down here, and remote control using terminal services is enabled. So let's minimize this, and let's go start my terminal services client. Okay, by default in Windows XP, the remote desktop connection is what it's called. This is really just the terminal services client. Is in Programs, Accessories, Communication, then the remote desktop connection is what it's called. Actually, it's called tsclient.exe is the real executable. So I'm just going to click here, and it says basically what IP address or computer do you want to connect to. Well, let's look at the IP address of this computer over here. If I go back to this computer, I go to Start, Command Prompt, and I type ipconfig. The IP address of this computer is 192.168.1.111. So I'll go back here, and there's the IP address I want to connect to. 192.168.1.111. And it just got that through DHCP off of my local router's DHCP scope. So I'm going to click Connect, and it says the following local devices will be made available to the remote computer. This may be potentially unsafe. In our case, yeah, sure, it might be unsafe, but that's a great feature for remote administration. If I can make the host disk drives available to the guest operating system, what that means is, hey, I can share files through the remote desktop client. A great way to share files. Now, there's another way to share files, but this is one of the ways. So I'm going to say OK there. All right, well, that took a lot longer than it should have, and even worse, it didn't work. So let's take a look at why this isn't working. It says the client could not connect to the remote computer. remote connections might not be enabled on the computer, or the computer might be too busy to accept new connections. It's also possible that network problems are preventing your connection. Well, let's look at these one by one. It says remote connections might not be enabled. Well, we know that's not true because we just went in and enabled remote connections. The second thing says is, or the computer might be too busy to accept new connections. Well, we know that's not true because the computer's not doing anything, right? Third thing it says is it's also possible that network problems are preventing your connection. Well, this computer is right on my computer, so where's the network problem there? They're both on the same computer. It's not even really going through the network. But it says network problems. Let's go back and let's look again at the remote desktop and make sure we didn't forget something. So I'm going to go back here to the computer. I'm going to go to Start, go to My Computer, go to Properties, go to Remote, and it says Enable Remote Desktop on this computer. Let's go ahead, let's turn it off. I'll say OK. Let's go back in. Turn it back on. And it says local accounts might not have passwords. Okay, that's fine. And look at this message here that I just blew right by. It says if you're using the internet connection sharing or a personal firewall, the correct port must be open to enable remote connections. Personal firewall. Well, this is Windows 2003 Server with Service Pack 1 built into it. So Service Pack 1, what it does is it enables Windows Firewall right on the server. So we can either, one, we can go turn it off, or we can allow an exception so that remote desktop can come in. So I'm going to say OK there, say OK. Let's go look at this Windows Firewall. I'm going to go to Start, go to Control Panel, go to Network Connections, go to the Local Area Connection, click on that. I'm going to go to Properties. And again, well, before I go in there, look at this. This just looks like I have a 100 megabyte adapter on this server, right? Well, we know in reality, this server is really just running on my Windows XP desktop. And that Windows XP desktop has a wireless network adapter to connect to the wireless network. So it's pretty amazing to me that the virtual server thinks it has a 100 megabyte connection when really it's going through a desktop PC with a wireless network adapter. So pretty amazing what virtual server can do. So I'm going to click Properties. I'm going to go to the Advanced tab, click on the Windows Firewall settings right here. And sure enough, it's on. The Windows Firewall is on. So we could either turn it off, or we could go into exceptions here, and we could allow remote desktop. Now, I'm going to use this for file and print sharing. I want to use it for a lot of different things. I really don't want this Windows Firewall interfering potentially with some of the things I want to do with this server. So just to be safe, I'm going to go ahead and turn it off. Say OK there, and OK. Close that out. And there's also another way to go in and turn it off. If I go to Control Panel, go to the Security Center. Oh, or I'm sorry, not Security Center, the Windows Firewall, they call it in Windows 2003. So if I click there, brings me up to the same window again, and we can see, sure enough, it's off. So I'm going to close that out. Let's minimize this. We'll go back here to our remote desktop connection. I'm going to click Connect. Again, it tells us that it's going to connect the disk drives. I'll tell it to not prompt me about this again, and I'll say OK. And voila, there we go. We're connected to the remote desktop. I can log on, and we're logged on to the server. Now notice here, I can scroll the screen back and forth. Obviously, this isn't very convenient that you can't see the whole screen. So one of the things I can do here is I can change the resolution. I can lower the resolution to fit this whole screen on my screen. Oops, I accidentally clicked troubleshoot there. Didn't mean to do that. Just a second, let me close that out. Okay. Um, but that's the default. That's the default resolution. Now, if your screen resolution is higher than the screen resolution of the remote desktop resolution, then everything will be fine. It'll fit on your screen fine. So I'm going to scroll down here and I'm going to go to Start, and I'm just going to log off this remote desktop connection. So let's try this again. So I go to Programs, Accessories, Communications, Remote Desktop Connection. I'm going to click on Options this time. Let's take a look at our options. Here I can automate the logon. I can tell it to save my password, not very secure, but it's very convenient. I can go to Display, and here's where I choose the size of my remote desktop resolution. I can choose to share remote resources. I can start a program. There's some other features here. Let's go back to General and close that out, and let's reconnect. And this time it automatically logged me on, and it used the 640 by 480 resolution. So this time I can see the whole screen of the remote server. And this is much more responsive when it comes to mouse control. It responds faster than the virtual machine remote client. But again, if the server has blue screened or hung, remote desktop isn't going to work. So remote desktop is a great way to do remote control or remote management of your virtual servers. In fact, you can even make an icon on your desktop, like one for each virtual server that you control, and you can quickly connect to those computers through the remote desktop. You can automate the logon just like I did here, so I was able to quickly connect using remote desktop. So that's how to enable remote management using terminal services or remote desktop with Windows and virtual server. So now let's move on to our next slide. And now we'll talk about configuring and adding hardware to a virtual machine. Now to configure or add hardware to a virtual machine, you should choose to configure the virtual machine, then select the type of hardware you want to add or configure. You can add or configure IDE disk, SCSI disk adapters, SCSI disk, CD/DVD drives, floppy drives, network adapters, COM ports, or LPT ports. So you can add a lot of different hardware to a virtual machine. So let's go take a look at this. So over here on our web-based administration interface for Microsoft Virtual Server, right here I'm in the status for our Blue Crab Food Windows Server. I can scroll down, and down here is the configuration for it. So here I have, again, memory, hard drives, CD, DVD, SCSI adapters, network adapters, floppy drives, COM ports, and LPT ports. So if I go into each one of these, this is where I would configure or add additional hardware. So, however, before I add hardware, really what I need to do is shut down this virtual machine. So I'm going to go back here. I'm going to press the host key, which is right alt, then delete. I'll log on. I'll go to start. Oh, I don't want to log off. I want to shut down. I want to shut down this virtual machine to add hardware. Now, of course, I could just power off the virtual machine. I have that power as administrator, but the proper way to shut down any computer is to go through the software shutdown process. So that's what I'm doing here. There we go, it's turned off. Let me see if I can resize this. No, I can't resize it. That's all right. So now let's go back and let's refresh this. All right, the status has changed on the virtual machine. You can see here the image, it's grayed out, it's turned off. If I go to control it, you can see the only thing I can do is turn it on or remove it. And then down here, the status, it says it's off, and all the stats here are gone. So if I scroll on down, you can see here, here's where I control the memory or the RAM, the hard drives, the CD or DVD drives, SCSI adapters, network adapters, floppy drives, COM ports, and LPT ports. Let's just say that I want to add a new CD drive. So if I click here on CD, right now I have one virtual CD DVD drive 1, and it doesn't have any media in it. And if I go to add CD DVD drives, let's go ahead and connect this second drive to a known image file. Let's say I want to install Microsoft Office. So a known image file right here in the drop downs, there's none that are known. But if I minimize this and I go to my computer and I go over to my ISO image files, let's see, here's my Office 2003 Pro. So I'm going to click rename on that. I'm going to do Control C to copy that. I'm going to go back here, and the fully qualified path is going to be G:\\. And I'm going to do Control V to paste that in, .iso. So that's the name of the image file that's going to be the second CD drive on my virtual machine. And then let me open up my CD drive here, and I'm going to put in, let's see, I'm just going to put in a copy of Windows XP Pro, a CD, in my D drive on this computer, and I'm going to connect this first drive to that physical CD drive. So what this will do is when we boot up this virtual machine, it should see the Windows XP CD in the D drive that's on my host computer. So on the guest, that'll be the first CD drive. The second CD drive will be this Office 2003 Pro Enterprise. And this doesn't necessarily mean that these are going to be drive C or drive D and E, but most likely they will be. So I'm going to go down here and click OK. And if I scroll down, it shows here now I have two CD drives. The first one actually is the ISO image. The second is the D drive on my host computer. And that happened because I took the default of the primary channel 1 on this drive when I created it. So I put the primary channel before the secondary channel. But it was that easy to add a CD drive. And now when I boot up my computer, I'll have two CD drives. I could easily, just as easily, add a second network adapter that went to the physical Ethernet adapter on my host computer. I could add another network adapter that went to a private network on the virtual server network. I could easily add a second hard drive, a COM port, floppy drive, LPT port. In an upcoming video, we'll spend the whole video just talking about different types of hard disk and SCSI adapters. That was just the automatic refresh. It does that periodically. So now let's go ahead and boot up our virtual machine and make sure that our new CD drive appears. So if I go back here to my remote console, I'm going to connect to the server. It says it's turning on. And actually in the BIOS screen right there, when it went through the IDE disk, it showed that there was a new CD drive. And it said press any key to boot from CD. I didn't press a key, so it shouldn't be booting from CD. But that's just another sign that tells you that it recognizes there's a bootable CD in that CD drive, which is that Windows XP CD that I stuck in there. While this is booting, let me talk for a second about floppy drives. You might think that floppy drives are useless or a dead technology, but with virtual server, you can have what they call virtual floppy drives. So virtual floppy drives are just a file on your computer, on the host computer, where you have this virtual floppy drive. And floppy drives are still useful for doing some things like imaging of computers. You can insert a floppy drive, and you can use like sysprep with a text file to create a new virtual server with a virtual floppy drive. And on that virtual floppy drive, you would have the config file for that new virtual server. And as the virtual server is created, it uses the config file from the virtual floppy drive. So there's some pretty cool things you can do actually with floppy drives. It seems strange to me saying that there's cool things you can do with floppy drives, but there really are. So I'm going to press the host key and then delete. I'm going to log on, close this out, and let's go into my computer. And notice here I have two CD drives. I have a D drive, which is, this is actually the Windows XP CD right here, the D drive. The E drive is my Office 2003 that I mounted. So this is a virtual CD drive. This is a physical CD drive. So if I were to take the CD out of my physical CD drive, I just pressed eject. So that CD drive is on the host. Let's see, let me find another CD here to put in there. Here's a Windows XP Service Pack 2 CD. Let's go ahead and put that in. And just like any CD drive, it'll take a minute for it to refresh the status of that, to recognize the new CD, refresh the status. But my point I want to make here is that with a physical CD, of course you can change CDs back and forth. It just takes a minute. With the virtual ISO file, that's defined at boot up. So I have this Office CD, and I can use it, and it works great. But I'm not going to go in and change this. So I'm going to click refresh here. And it didn't change the volume label, but let's go in and let's see if it changed from that can happen sometimes. The parameter is incorrect. To me, this is sort of a bug. But what I did is I changed the CD, and I didn't tell Virtual Server anything about it. So let's go over, and here's a little troubleshooting trick for virtual CD drives. If I go in, and it tells me here, here's my D drive. What I can do is I can do no media. So I just changed it to not having any media in the D drive. And then I'm going to change it back and tell it that there is media. Say OK. And now let's go back to the virtual server, and there we go. It fixed it. So it's a little quirk with virtual server, how it works. And sometimes when you use physical CD drives, you do have to go in and basically like unattach it and reattach it. But that's how it works. So now it recognized the new CDs in there. If I were to change back to the old CD, let's just double check this. Make sure that this theory proves true. So I inserted the new CD, actually the original CD that was in there before. I see it reading the CD drive. Still says Windows XP CD, Service Pack 2. If I double click on it, still thinks that's what's in there, but it really isn't. So if I double click on this, it says the file is corrupt, but that's really because the file isn't there at all. So to fix this problem, you go into CD DVD again, do no media, go back in there and tell it that there's new media. And it recognizes the new media. So you see how that works. Basically, anytime you're using a physical CD drive, anytime you change CDs after boot up, you have to go in and detach it and reattach it. So it works fine, but it's just a little quirk. It's something to know about, something to understand, and just another benefit to using virtual ISO images is you don't have to worry about that. So that's how adding new CD drives works, and little troubleshooting step when it comes to CD drives. I can go add other hardware as well, but I think that you get the point as to how to add hardware to your virtual server. It's really easy. Um, Not a lot to it at all, just pointing and clicking. Some hardware, of course, the server has to be turned off, like to increase the RAM. It says memory settings cannot be changed because the virtual machine is running or saved. But if I turn that machine off, I can quickly change this to 512 or 1 gigabyte, reboot it, and that virtual server has more RAM. It's a lot easier than getting a screwdriver and opening the case and inserting your memory chip that you had to buy and have shipped to you over the internet. Adding virtual machine RAM is much easier in comparison. So with that, let's go back to our slides. And we just talked about how to configure and add hardware to a virtual machine. And now let's go on to our next section. Now let's talk about removing, adding, and cloning virtual machines. Now the easiest way to create a new virtual machine is to copy an old virtual machine or an existing virtual machine. Now if you only intend to do this periodically, you can just copy the virtual machine on the disk. However, if you intend to do this in a production environment, you should use sysprep. For more information on sysprep, you can go to this link. What sysprep does is it creates essentially a version of Windows that hasn't quite finished the installation. And what you do is you build an installation parameter file, essentially, that fills in the necessary information, and then you fill in the rest of the information as soon as Windows boots up. So it's a version of Windows that's almost done installing, and then just the last part's done right there where it creates the new virtual machine. But if you intend to just create a virtual machine periodically by copying a new one, there's a few things you should know. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with doing this. At my company, we do this all the time. One person's got a Windows XP machine and somebody else needs one. Hey, just share that on the network. I'm going to get a copy of it. Then I'll bring it into my virtual server or my virtual PC. So it's a great way of sharing virtual machines. But if it's not a sysprepped image, then you have to do a few things. And I made a list of those things here. So the first one is to shut down the virtual machine that you want to clone. You can't clone it if it's running, so make sure that it's shut down. Next thing is you copy the entire directory for the virtual machine to another directory and you rename the associated folders and files. And I'll show you exactly how this is done in just a second. Next, you change the configuration for the virtual machine to point to the right VHD. The VMC is the virtual machine configuration file. So you're going to change the configuration on that to point to the right VHD. Now that's not hard. It's just a point and click, a couple points and clicks in the web interface and you're done. And I'll show you how to do that. Next, you need to change the computer name. You don't want it to have the same computer name as the original machine. If you're using static IP addresses, you're going to have to change the IP address, of course. You don't want an IP address conflict on the network. And then finally, you need to change the SID on the virtual machine. This is assuming you're using Windows. Every Windows machine has a unique identifier number that identifies that installation of Windows. If these two machines are going to work together on the network or communicate with each other at the Windows level, you need to create a new SID on this new virtual machine so that you don't have problems. Now to do this, you can use this utility called newsid.exe. It's a free utility. Originally, it's made by sysinternals, which was a separate company. Now sysinternals is fully owned by Microsoft. They were bought by Microsoft, So now this is actually a Microsoft utility called newsyd.exe. It's just a little command line utility. You do newsyd/a. It automatically creates a new SID on the new computer. It's that simple. If that computer was a member of the Active Directory, you'll need to do a few additional things. In fact, before you change the SID and you rename the computer, you would want to um, join a work group or get out of the Active Directory. You don't want to mess up things in Active Directory. Um, so anyway, to obtain this utility, you can download it from this link. And we'll be downloading it here on our newly cloned machine in just a little bit. So for now, let's give it a try. Let's give these steps a try right here to clone a virtual machine. We have the Blue Crab Food Windows Server 2003. It's our server number 1 of that type. We're going to copy that. We're going to clone it and try to create a second identical computer just like the one we have now. This is really going to help out the Blue Crab Food Company, and it's going to help demonstrate to them how you can use Virtual Server to just easily create brand new servers, brand new virtual machines in only a few minutes. So with that, we'll give it a try. Going to go down here and go back to this hard drive, and let's go to My Computer. And before we go and start copying the files, what was the first thing I said that we had to do? We need to shut down the virtual machine that we want to clone. So to do this, I'm going to go back to the web interface for Microsoft Virtual Server. Right here's our virtual machine. I'm going to notice that it's running. It is running right now. So what we need to do is go to the virtual machine and shut it down. So I'm going to close this utility. Come back here. It says the virtual machine is now off. So that's good. That means we can go copy it or clone it. So we shut it down. Our next step is to copy the entire directory for the virtual machine to another directory and rename the associated folders and files. So I'm going to go to My Computer. I'm going to go to C:, go to Documents and Settings, into All Users. This is where all the virtual machines are stored. Into Shared Documents for all users. And right here you'll find Shared Virtual Machines. So I'm going to go in here, and here is our Blue Crab Food Win Server 1. Now if you didn't know the path to this, you didn't know this file, you could go back here to your administrative console, scroll down, and right here, here's the path to the VMC, the virtual machine configuration file. You can see it's in, oh, that was the automated refresh. It's in Documents and Settings, All Users, Documents, Shared Virtual Machines, then the Blue Crab Food Win Server 1, then here's the .vmc file. So what I need to do is copy this entire directory here, this entire Blue Crab Food Win Server 1 directory. So if I go back, let's just peek inside that directory for a second. Here you see the virtual hard drive. That's the actual hard drive for that virtual machine. It's only 1.4 gigabytes. Then here's the VMC file. This is the configuration file for that virtual machine. It's just a text file. It's in XML format. If I right-click it and I say Open, if I select a program from the list, I'm going to select Notepad. And I just want to show you that this VMC file is just an XML file. You can see here XML version 1. And this is all the configurations for this, this virtual machine. You can see here, here's the CD-ROM drives. Here's the path to the CD-ROM. You can see the path here to the CD that we added, the second drive. All the configuration for this virtual machine is in here. It can be edited, but I wouldn't recommend it. I would definitely recommend going to the web interface to make any configuration changes. So if I go back up a level, what I want to copy is this right here. I'm going to right click on that and say copy. Then I'm going to right click right here and I'm going to say paste. Now copying 1.5 gigabytes is going to take about 2 minutes, it says. 3 minutes now. So in that time period, I'm going to pause the video just so we don't have to sit here and wait. And with the magic of video, we'll be back as soon as the copy is done. All right, the copy just completed. And this is our new folder right here, copy of Blue Crab Food Win Server 1. So the first thing I'm going to do is right click on this and I'm going to rename it. If I go to the end here, I'm just going to change this to 2. And I'll tell you what, let's take off the copy. That would make sense too, wouldn't it? Let's go to the front, take off the copy. So now it's Blue Crab Food Win Server 2. If I go inside, notice this still says Blue Crab Food Win Server 1. I'm going to right click on this, I'm going to rename it to Win Server 2. And I'm also going to rename the VMC file to Win Server 2. Okay, so we renamed our 2 files in our 1 folder to Blue Crab Food Win Server 2. And I'm going to close this out. So back here on our slides, we shut it down, we copied it, we renamed it, and the next thing we need to do is to change the configuration for the VMC to point to the right VHD, and we also need to add it into Microsoft Virtual Server. That's an important part as well. So if I go back here to our web interface, I'm going to go to Master Status. You can see here I have Blue Crab Food Win Server 1 and our old test server. So for me to add a new virtual machine, I'm going to go right here. This isn't creating a new virtual machine. This is adding a VMC file that's already out on the hard drive. That's what we have. We copied the one from WinServer 1, we renamed it WinServer 2, and it's already out on the hard drive. So I just need to tell Virtual Server about it, essentially. I don't need to create a new VMC file, which is what the create would do. So if I go into Add, right here we have known configuration files. If I do a drop down, it does have a known configuration file here. Let's take a look at that. Let's see if this is the right one. Okay, sure enough it is. Documents and settings, all users, documents, shared virtual machines, Blue Crab Food WinServer 2, Blue Crab Food WinServer 2 .vmc. So this is an unused VMC file. Microsoft Virtual Server found out about it because it's in that proper path, and it's telling us, hey, you can add this known configuration file that I found out about. So say you copied a virtual server from someone else that had a VMC file and a VHD. You copy it in that directory there, that folder structure. Microsoft Virtual Machine or Virtual Server knows about it. You can come in here and you can add it, and within minutes you have a new virtual machine. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to add it. And one thing I point out when I talk about sharing virtual machines from one person to another, this of course assumes that you have the licensing to do that. You know, you have to have a license for every virtual machine that you're running. So you can't just copy someone else's virtual machine if you don't have a license for the same software. Many times this is done at companies where they have enterprise agreements. So they can just pay Microsoft a yearly fee for the software that they use, and that way it's much easier to distribute these virtual machines. On the other hand, maybe you have a small company and you have a handful of licenses, and you move one virtual machine, test virtual machine, from one person to another. That's within the license agreements as well. So just keep licensing in mind when you share virtual machines, because it is so easy to share virtual machines. It makes you want to do it, but you also have to remember to pay Microsoft to do it. So this is our new Microsoft Virtual Machine, Blue Crab Food WinServer 2. If I scroll down here, notice the path to the VMC file is correct. It's WinServer 2, WinServer2.vmc. If I scroll on down here, notice something in the virtual hard drive here. The virtual hard drive is still pointing to WinServer 1. Even though we copied WinServer 1's virtual hard drive into our new folder and renamed it WinServer2, it's still pointing to WinServer1. So the reason for that is we copied the VMC file, which we renamed and added. But that VMC file points to the old virtual hard drive. So what I need to do is go in here to hard disks, and I need to change this path right here. First, let's see if there's any known virtual hard disk. Let's check out this one. Sure enough, there's our known virtual hard drive. It knew about it because it's within that path. So that saves me from having to, edit this down here or copy and paste something in. So I'm just going to say OK there. So here's our new virtual machine. If I scroll down, we can verify that the new virtual hard drive is Blue Crab Food WinServer2.vhd. You can see here we have a couple CD-ROM drives. This was copied from the original server. You see this one goes to the Office 2003 Pro Enterprise ISO file. That's the update refresh right there. And we have these because they were in the VMC file that was copied from the original Blue Crab Food #1 server. So I can go in here because this is a different server, and I can edit these configurations for this server, and they won't affect the original server. So scroll down, I just have one CD-ROM drive here now. If I scroll back up and I go to configure Blue Crab Food WinServer1, we can see it still has two CD-ROM drives. So these are two completely separate machines. Let's go back to configuring server number 2. Completely separate machines, but yet they're very similar. Because they were copied, or this one was copied from the original VMC file for server number 1. So now let's go back to our slides over here. We just finished changing the configuration for the VMC to point to the right virtual hard drive. Next, we need to boot up this server. We need to change the computer name. If we're using a static IP address, we need to change that IP address, which we're not in this case. We're using DHCP. And then we need to talk about changing the SID. I'll come back to that as soon as we get the computer started and change the computer name. So I'll go back here to our web-based administration, go to this computer, and I'll turn it on. And it'll take just a second to boot up. And while it's booting up, let me come back here and talk about changing the SID. We're going to download this program called newsid.exe from Microsoft, formerly sysinternals. And I'll show you how to use it. It's just a newsid/a is really all you have to do. That's the /a switch that stands for automatic. I like switches like that. So let's go back here. Let's see if our server's booting up. I'm going to click on the screen thumbnail. Going to have to log in again. And yes, the server has booted. I'm going to log on. So first we need to change our computer name. To do that, I'm going to go to My Computer, going to right click, go to Properties, going to go to Computer Name. You see here it's still called bcrab WinServer1. I'm going to change that to WinServer2. Says we must restart for this change to take effect. I'll say OK. Say OK here. And I'm not going to restart yet because what I want to do is go in and change the SID. So I'm going to open up Internet Explorer. I'm going to go to Google. I'm going to type in sysinternals. This will take me to the Microsoft TechNet Sysinternal's website. If I click on that link, if I click on the security utilities over here, that's what we want. And I'll scroll down and I'll find this utility here called new SID. Now this says many organizations use disk image cloning to perform mass rollouts of Windows. This technique involves copying the disk of a fully installed and configured Windows computer onto the disk drives of other computers. These other computers effectively appear to have been through the same install process and are immediately available for use. While this method saves hours of work and hassle over other rollout approaches, it has major problems that every clone system has an identical computer security identifier, or the SID. This fact compromises security in workgroup environments, and removable media security can also be compromised in networks with multiple identical computer SIDs. So what they've done is they've introduced this utility called new SID, which will go in and change the SID of this computer. Now if we scroll down through the version info here, talks about different cloning and rollout methods. It goes into details here on the problem with SID duplication, exactly why it is a problem. And what we're going to use is the new SID/A, and it says to use the auto run option, specify /A on the command line. You can also direct it to automatically change the computer's name by including the new name after the /A switch. So we already changed this computer's name, but that could be something we added on here at the end. So let's see, the new SID synchronization feature allows you to specify, instead of randomly generating one, the new SID should be obtained from a different computer. That's another possibility if you use some of the other options here. But we're just going to use the /A for auto run. Goes into details here on how it works. And to download it, you just click right here. It's only 68 kilobytes, very small. I'm going to say save. I'm going to save it to the desktop, and it's done. So here we have our new SID right here. I'm going to open it up. I'm going to right-click on the new SID.exe because that's really all I need. I'm going to copy it and then paste it right over here on the desktop. Now open a command line, and I'm going to do a dir right here. I'm already in my administrator documents and settings. I'm going to cd into desktop, do a dir, and there's my new SID.exe. Now immediately after I do the new SID, I'm going to reboot. So before I reboot, I just want to double check the IP address, make sure that the IP address really has changed. I'm going to go to Control Panel, go to Local Area Connection, I'm going to go to Support, and you can see here the IP address was assigned by DHCP. So we know we're using DHCP. Now, of course, if this was a domain controller or an email server, some other important server that needed a static IP address, you would have a static on it and you'd have to go in and manually change it. But since we're using DHCP, that's going to prevent IP address conflicts, and we shouldn't have any problems with the IP address. So I'm going to close this out, and last thing I need to do here is type new SID.exe/A. So I run that, there's no error messages, and the SID change is complete. Now I'm going to exit out of this, and then last thing I need to do here is just go to shutdown, and I'm going to restart this computer. I'm going to put in here that I changed the SID. And then after the computer restarts, that computer will be ready for use. So now let's go back to our slides. And the last thing we did here was to change the SID. So just to review the process of cloning a virtual machine, you shut down the existing virtual machine that you want to clone. You copy the entire directory from the virtual machine to another directory, and you rename the associated folders and files. There's only 2 files and 1 folder. You change the configuration for the VMC, that's the configuration file, to point to the right virtual hard drive. You do that inside the web-based administrator console for Microsoft Virtual Server. You change the computer name, which we saw you can even incorporate that into the new SID process to make it even smoother. And if you have a static IP address, of course, you need to change the static IP. If you're using DHCP, you don't have to worry about it. Then finally, you change the SID. After you change the SID, reboot the computer, and it's ready for use. So that's the process of cloning a virtual machine. And you can do that within a few minutes. Really this whole process took me only about 5 minutes if I had have been just doing it without explaining the process. So it would be pretty amazing to have a brand new server up in 5 minutes today if I had to, go through the normal process, which is order one from, Dell or one of the other server manufacturers, have it delivered, take it out of the box, put it in a rack, install the operating system, get it on the network, connect it to a UPS, connect it to the switch. All those different things you have to do to a new server can take many hours and even weeks sometimes. So by being able to quickly clone a virtual server and have it up within 5 minutes, have a fully functioning Windows 2003 server with just about whatever resources that server might need. It's a really amazing thing to be able to do that with Microsoft Virtual Server. So with that, we can move on to our conclusion. So in conclusion, in this video, video number 3, we learned about how to create a new virtual machine. We saw the different media that you can use along with your virtual machine. You can use physical media, which would be real CDs and real CD drives, or you can use virtual media, which would be image files like ISO image files. I recommend people to create ISO files or image files of their frequently used CDs and put them on the host directory or host computer and share that directory out on the network. There's many different, time-saving features you can get by creating those ISO files and sharing them on the network or having them just on that one host machine. So there's a lot you can do with that. Then we learned about how to install your operating system. We installed Microsoft Windows Server 2003. We learned about configuring your BIOS settings. We went into the BIOS and looked at that. We learned how to install the Microsoft Virtual Machine Editions and how important that is in controlling your virtual machine and getting good performance out of a virtual machine. Most importantly, it gives you control of the mouse or synchronization of the mouse between the host and the guest operating system. Then we learned how to configure and add hardware to a virtual machine. We added CD-ROM drives to our virtual machine. We saw how easy it is to add other hard drives and other, even COM ports, LPT ports, whatever it is we need to add to the virtual machine. We saw how easy that is just by pointing and clicking. Then finally, we learned about how you can, remove, add, and clone virtual machines and even share virtual machines from one computer to another computer. So with that, we've reached the end of video number 3, creating and using Microsoft virtual machines. Thank you very much.